So, as we count down the days before MLS Cup 2021 is going to happen, which at the time of this recording, it'll be 4 days before the Portland Timbers set to host NYCFC in MLS Cup 2021, I decided to make two different videos, talk about both of the finalists and how their road to MLS Cup is like this season, and we'll cover pretty much their entire season, though it's going to be excluding any other competition that they're in. So in the case of the Portland Timbers, I know they were in CCL early part of the season, but I'm not going to kind of mention it because, you know, it really didn't kind of play too much part in terms of their run to MLS Cup. Though I will say that, you know, early in the season with how they were struggling to get points, maybe it kind of did play a part of it with the way that, it wasn't just kind of the injuries concern that this Timbers team had early in the season that kind of got them off to a slow start, but with the way that when you do have to prioritize CONCACAF Champions League, it's going to definitely take a toll on your team, and that, it seems like the Timbers were definitely prioritized CCL early and was just kind of maybe punting the ball a little bit in terms of some of the games that they play early in the season. Now, nevertheless, they definitely did not get off to a good start to the season. The first game, they lost 1-0 on the road against the Vancouver Whitecaps, and remember, this was back when the Whitecaps were still playing at Rio Tinto Stadium and played in a stadium that was closed-door. But the very next game, they did bounce back by winning 2-1 against the Houston Dynamo. But then the very next week, yeah, this was one of the more embarrassing losses that the Timbers have suffered. Well, I will say that I think that was the game where they were playing against Dallas. It was a game where I think Savarese did sit out most of his team, and that it was kind of almost like a second team against FC Dallas. And Dallas, coming into that game, they were kind of in a must-win situation after how bad they also start the early part of the season. But yeah, the Timbers got thumped 4-1 in that game, and then the very next week when they play against the Seattle Sounders in the Cascadia Derby, they lost that one 2-1. So they start the season winning only one out of their first 4 games and was sitting near the bottom of the Western Conference. And this is also kind of where I started to question myself. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have predicted the Portland Timbers to finish first in the Western Conference like I did my early season prediction. But that being said, the very next week when they play against then a relatively good San Jose Earthquakes team. I mean, people forgot the Quakes actually got off to a great start to the season. And yes, that game, they were coming off of a 1-0 loss against the Seattle Sounders. But, going into this game, the Timbers was also really short-handed. They were actually down to their 4th-string goalkeeper in this game in Logan Kettner, and that's when that 4th-string goalkeeper decided to have the game of his life, making some incredible save to give the Timbers a 2-0 lead, and not to mention the attack as depleted as it was. I think that was the game when Jimmy Chara scored 2 goals and the Timbers were able to win 2-0 on the road. And then the very next week, they followed that big victory by winning 3-0 at home against the Galaxy. But then the very next week, when they do had to go to the Philadelphia Union, they lost 3-0 in that game. And that was the game where they just could not defend set piece. And that would actually be kind of the story for this Timbers team, at least for a majority of the season, of the struggle of them unable to defend set pieces. Though they did bounce back the very next weekend by winning 2-1 against Sporting KC before it was a 2-2 draw between both, or actually not the very next week, because we also had the Gold Cup break. So the first game back on the Gold Cup break, the Timbers did have that reset of the mindset by winning 2-1 against Sporting KC, and then they drew 2-2 against the Portland Timbers. But then when they do play at home against Minnesota, they lost 1-0 in that game, and that was probably one of the more frustrating games if you're a Timbers fan, because the Timbers really dominate Minnesota in that one, and the only reason why they weren't able to get a win or even get a point out of this is a combination of Tyler Miller making some good save, and also they just did not have their shooting boots in this game. But nevertheless, the very next game is also one of their more embarrassing losses this season, losing to Austin FC 4-1 on the road, and that was also a historic moment for Austin FC too, because that was also the first win that they ever had at home at Q2 Stadium. And certainly that I also remember that was a game that if you're an Austin FC fan, or in general if you're an MLS fan, it has to be such a great moment to see this team and that that night of just such a raucous crowd seeing their team absolutely destroyed the Portland Timbers. But if you're a Timbers fan, yeah, that was kind of embarrassing. And in some way, it just gives you nightmares about how, for whatever reason, this Timbers team always tends to struggle against expansion team, or in some cases just get completely shellacked by expansion team. I mean, it happened back in 2019. Remember when they played against FC Cincinnati on the road, and Cincinnati was playing their first ever home game? Yeah, the Timbers lost 3-0 in that game against a Cincinnati team that, well, we know how they end up in their expansion season and their luck in their first 3 years in MLS. But nevertheless, they did bounce back after that terrible loss. I mean, it seems like that, during that time, that was also the day before we gone in another break. Actually, this is not the Gold Cup break. This was the Gold Cup break. I think this was the Euros or Copa America break that MLS had. But as we head into July, this is when the Gold Cup break happened. And again, that break couldn't come at a better time, because the Timbers absolutely need to regroup after that embarrassing loss that they suffer against Austin FC. And they were able to come back strong with a 1-0 win against FC Dallas before winning 2-1 against LAFC. Though when they did go on the road against Minnesota, and keep in mind this is a short week, it's only on a 3-day rest, they lost that one 2-1 on the road before going to the Galaxy. And remember how the Galaxy got absolutely shellacked early in the season? Yeah, the Galaxy want some revenge. They won 4-1 against the Portland Timbers in that game. And then just a couple of days ago, they drew 1-1 against the San Jose Earthquakes at match. I think that's kind of embarrassing if you're the Timbers, knowing the fact that, I've mentioned before how every time when the Timbers play against the Quakes, especially at Providence Park, it's always an automatic win. And the fact that was not an automatic win, that's when there was still some concern if you're a Timbers fan of how this team is going to progress. Because, after they did come back by winning 3-2 against RSL, the very next game, yeah, this was probably the beginning of one of the lowest moments if you're a Timbers fan, and a moment when this club really kind of started to hit rock bottom, as they got destroyed 6-2 by the Seattle Sounders at home. Like, that was probably the most embarrassing display that the Portland Timbers has had at home, probably in their history. Like, I don't remember the last time that the Portland Timbers get absolutely destroyed at home like the way that they is, and especially in the Cascadia Derby too. That is probably one of the most lopsided Cascadia Derby game we have seen. And yet, what's also kind of interesting about that game is that as much as the scoreline basically indicated it was kind of an absolute thrashing, it really wasn't, with the way that when you look at how the Timbers actually had some opportunity in that game, and there's been times that they could have easily maybe turned things around, but then they just couldn't finish their chances. And every time when they also make a mistake on the other end, or when the Sounders has a set piece opportunity, they capitalize on that, and hence that's why the scoreline was just so much of a thrashing as we saw in that one. Though again, that's certainly one that if you're a Timbers fan, you definitely do not want to remember that game. And as I mentioned about how they were kind of hitting rock bottom, well, the very next week they drew 1-1 against Sporting KC in a game where I talked about before how much this is probably the last team that they want to face, with the way that they just got absolutely embarrassed by their hated rival, and now they have to play against, I believe at that time was a Sporting KC team that was in second in the Western Conference, and you have to play them on a road, and not to mention on a short week. And they almost kind of pulled it off too. They were leading 1-0 in that game, and then the old habits of the Portland Timbers giving up late goals happened in that game, as they gave up a late 90th minute goal to Sporting KC to drew 1-1 in that game. And then the very next game, this is really when the Timbers hit rock bottom. They lost to that team called Austin FC again, this time losing 3-1 in that game against them. And at that point, I think the Timbers were at 9th place in the Western Conference. And, that not only was probably the worst week if you're a Timbers fan, but that was kind of the week where I even have heard that there was some Timbers fan that was questioning the team, and especially even demanding Giovanni Savarese to be fired by this team. But little did we know, the very next game when they play against the Seattle Sounders, and I mentioned it before in the Cascadia Derby, it's not just a game. Like, I know some people will say, well, yeah, it's the Cascadia Derby, but if you look at it and if you don't just kind of look at how important this game is for both teams, at the end of the day, it's just 3 points. Well, it might be, but here's why I say it's not. Because, if you don't, of course, not look at the thing that, with both of these teams really want this game because it really means a lot to their fans, and it gives some bragging rights if their team was able to win the Cascadia Derby. But we've seen it before where late season Cascadia Derby match, whoever wins that game, they would actually not only get a huge 3 points, but go on a run and eventually could potentially go all the way to MLS Cup. And with the way that the Timbers were able to win 2-0 in that game against the Seattle Sounders, I thought that was not only what the doctors ordered for the Portland Timbers, but just something tells me that the Timbers can make a run. That this was going to be a big moment where they won a Cascadia Derby in Seattle, and gives a lot of calm to the players and also to their fans that they can make a good run to get themselves back into the playoff race. And little do we know, that is exactly what happened. Because the very next week, they were able to win on the road 2-0 against the Houston Dynamo. They then win on the road against Vancouver by winning 1-0. And keep in mind, this was back when the Whitecaps were one of the best team in terms of playing at home, and that they were also one of the hottest team in the league. And the fact that the Timbers were able to go to BC plays and able to knock the Whitecaps able to get all 3 points against the Whitecaps, that was just kind of unheard of, where the Whitecaps were just kind of picking up 3 points every single game when they were playing at home. Then the very next week, they got a 2-2 draw against the Colorado Rapids, which doesn't sound very impressive until you realize the Timbers were down to 10 men in that game when the game was at 1-0, and that the fact that not only they fought back not once but twice in that game by down to 10 men, including the fact that the Rapids actually took a late lead in the 85th minute, and you could easily say that was it for the Timbers. It looked like there's no way they're going to come back to salvage a point in that game. They did in this one, and I believe it was in stoppage time that they salvaged a point in this game, and this was really a game where it definitely felt like a win for the Timbers, even though at the end of the day it was still going to be a draw. But nevertheless, the very next game they went to Bank of California Stadium and not LAFC get a win in that game by winning 2-1 against LAFC. I keep saying that they knocked them out. They're not really playing a playoff game up to that point. But then the very next week, they of course win 1-0 against Inter Miami, and up to that point, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They won 5 out of their last 6 games, and 4 out of the last 5 ever since that big Cascadia Derby victory. And this is also when the Timbers really started to propel themselves up all the way to 4th place, and there was even question that they could really sneak into the conversation of maybe even finish in the top 3 in the Western Conference. But yeah, this is when reality started to kind of set in, and this is when they kind of had reached a peak a little bit, but then they kind of had fall a little bit down, and it's the Timbers kind of returned to a little bit of reality after that 1-0 win against Inter Miami, because the very next week they lost 2-1 against the Galaxy on the road. And then the very next game, Vancouver, they were probably against Vancouver, the team that they probably remember how they're not happy the fact that they dropped all 3 points against the Timbers at home. So they kind of decided to return the favor by winning 3-2 against them. And it was a game where it was once again an indictment of the old Portland Timbers team that we saw in 2020, a team that just blow leads in the second half, and that they just blew a 2-0 lead in this game against the Whitecaps and end up losing 3-2 in that one. And then the very next week they lost 2-0 against the Colorado Rapids, and all of a sudden a team that we thought maybe could get into the top 3 of the Western Conference, now there is even question whether or not if they can make it to the playoffs, because they really lost a lot of cushion in terms of them above the red line. And it was getting to a point where I even said that 4th spot, which is always very important because that's the last spot where you can host at least one playoff game in the playoffs, all of a sudden that spot was up for grabs. But they did get themselves back on track after winning 2-0 against the San Jose Earthquakes. Then the very next week they thought that they really took the soul out of RSL by winning 3-1 on the road in that game. And then they of course make sure to head to the playoffs with some momentum after able to kind of beat one of their nemesis this season, and that is Austin FC, by winning 3-0 at home. And as I said, even though they kind of had a little bit of a collapse in the beginning of October, they kind of made up for it in the latter part of October and head into the playoffs in a relatively good form. And they carry that as we head into the playoffs and in the first round, where they were playing against a Minnesota team that, I know a lot of people might say that Minnesota can pull this one off because they do have a good record against the Timbers, but with the way that, how the Loons was kind of falling apart a little bit down the stretch and kind of underachieving against a Timbers team that has a lot of confidence and is a team that also knows how to get it done in knockout competition, I thought the Timbers were going to get the win. And needless to say that, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but I did say that before the game between the Timbers and Minnesota that I picked the Portland Timbers to make it to MLS Cup and win the whole competition, and that prediction seems like it could really be a reality. But in that game against Minnesota, they win 3-1 in that one, and that's despite the fact that they were down 1-0 early in that one, and they kind of able to face that adversity by scoring 3 unanswered goals to win 3-1 in that one. And then in the very next game against a Colorado Rapids team that have already beat them earlier this season, and a team that is really hard to beat at home, only lost once this season at home, they go in there, and also not to mention they did not have Blanco for the remaining of the second half because he of course pulled his hamstring. But against all odds, they of course were able to get the victory, a 1-0 win against the Colorado Rapids on the road. And then in the Western Conference Final, despite the fact that they did not have Blanco and Asprilla because of his stupidity that he did near the end of that game against the Colorado Rapids, got himself sent off, they were able to pull off, I wouldn't say an upset in this one, because if I say it's an upset in this one, that doesn't really need to justify the fact that, RSL was coming into this game as the underdog, and they were once again trying to pull off the unthinkable, but the Timbers make sure that was not going to happen, and they were able to get a comfortable 2-0 victory against RSL, and now they're once again back in MLS Cup, and really they have a good shot of winning the whole thing too, because as we will talk tomorrow about NYCFC and how their runs to the playoffs, I know there's already going to be some people that say, well, yeah, NYCFC might have got lucky with some of the circumstances that they of course got to MLS Cup, but I'll also talk about why exactly that might not be the case, and that, as the old saying goes, there's no such thing as luck of getting into a championship game. Like, you always have to grind your way toward that, and in the case of the Portland Timbers, they definitely faced some adversity in this playoffs too, but they were able to get through those adversity, and now they're looking to try to win their second MLS Cup in their franchise history, and looking to trying to redeem themselves after what happened in 2018, and actually for once able to host a playoff game. This is the first time of the free MLS Cup that the Portland Timbers have participated that they get to host one. So yeah, it should be very, very interesting to see how it's going to be, but of course we'll talk a little bit more about that in the preview. In fact, I probably should have not talked too much in terms of how this game is going to be, because that's what the preview is going to be all about when I make it on Friday. But nevertheless, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? And as I said, tomorrow I will talk about how NYCFC, their road to MLS Cup is, and in some way their road to MLS Cup is a little bit similar, but there are some difference that NYCFC did kind of had to face some adversity, just like what the Portland Timbers at times had to face this season, and had to get themselves out of a tough spot, especially with how mediocre this team was in the first half of the season. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.